So what I've got here, I've been out and I've collected some autumnal leaves, but I've also got some inspiration pictures here. So if you're like me and you can never remember what the leaf shapes really look like, or what they're actually called, then you can just have a reference sheet like this available. So I've got this here because some of my favourites are on here. The red maple is one of my favourites. I really love sycamore leaves as well, just because they turn such a beautiful colour. And horse chestnut is really lovely. I think I might be adding some horse chestnuts into my design as well. And I've also got some, because recently we've been having some lovely fly agarics growing on Kings Hill, so I've got some of those to add in as well. And there's my sycamore leaf and an oak leaf. Oak has a particular significance for me, so I really like to include those in my paint. So I'm just going to pop those to one side so I've got them there as a reference. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with, I'm going to make a wreath design. So I'm going to have a wreath design here. I might move the camera periodically if I think that it's not visible for you to see. But please do let me know if you want to have a closer look at anything, and I'll pick it up and show you. Okay? So what I'm using today, mainly, I've got two really lovely mop brushes that I really like. So these are the Da Vinci mop brushes. I love these because they hold a really good amount of water in the ferrule and they paint beautifully. You can do really nice crisp thin lines, but you can also hold a lot of paint so that you can paint for ages and ages and ages without even having to reload. They're also really great if you're doing the wet on wet technique, actually the wet on dry technique as well, but because they hold so much water, they're really good for doing the wet on wet. So we have that. I also have a pencil handy just in case I'm not entirely sure of the shape of things, but just bear in mind that if you use a pencil and then you paint over the top of it, for some reason the application of water and paint means that you can't erase the pencil afterwards. So if you are wanting to erase the pencil afterwards so that you can't see it in your painting, then you need to make sure that you don't paint over that. And if you do, make sure it's a deep enough colour that you're not going to see your pencil lines afterwards. Okay, I have a couple of thinner liner brushes. So this one is made by one of my friends, Natalie Farmer. I hope she's watching. Absolutely gorgeous brush. It's actually something that I use when I'm face painting. It's a lovely little pink tip, so all of my painting friends will recognise that immediately. These are absolutely gorgeous brushes and they do really lovely thin lines. So when I want to do some sticks, some foliage and things like that later, I'm going to rely on these little bad boys to get me that effect that I want. Okay, and then I have my trusty paint palette. I'm a really messy painter. I make absolutely no apologies for that because it helps me so much. So I leave a lot of my colours out in the palette. The reason I do this is because I really love an organic look to my paints, and when you do this you get all these lovely mottled colours appear. I'm not particularly a purist, so I really love to have a combination of different colours, particularly when you paint in nature, because nature doesn't play by the rules either. So I've got those. I've also got these gorgeous Paul Rubens paints. So these have got a metallic tone to them. So part of the beauty of autumn is the lovely metallic, shiny, wet look that we get when we get rain on wet leaves. So I'm going to try and add some metallic sheen onto my wreath. And it also looks really lovely when you have it on berries, because berries get that lovely coating on them. They kind of get tarnished a little bit over time. And I really love metallics for adding that little bit of interest. And also, if this is going to be a picture that you put up, it really catches your eye when you have some metallics in there. So, without further ado, I'm going to crack on. Now that I have everything set up where I want, do you like my nice autumnal paint pot? It's got a little fox on there. I'll have to be careful not to drink from that. All my painty friends will know that it's a real hazard when you've got your paint water in a mug, because you're bound to drink it at some point or another. So if you hear me coughing and spluttering, I've probably just drunk my paint water. Okay, right, I'm going to make a start now. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to have some fly agarics at the very bottom of my wreath because I think it'll look really lovely to have them growing there organically. So I'm just going to add on some different colours onto here. So I'm making a nice kind of mushroomy type colour on here. So I've got a little bit of Payne's grey added into a peachy colour to get that kind of nice mushroomy colour. So I'm just going to mix that up, make it really nice and wet because I want this to be a really nice subtle colour. Okay, so I'm going to start by doing a couple of small little toadstool shapes. So I want them to grow. So some of these, because they all grow different shapes, different sizes, I'm going to do these a little bit different. So I'm going to have one that's kind of a real sharp bowl shape, and then I'm going to have another that has a slightly more, so I'm leaving a void here for the red of the fly agaric, and I'm going to have another here that's slightly skinnier. So I'm sorry if that's a really faint colour, but I'll try my best to do it in a way that you can see it. Can you see that okay? I hope you can. So anyway, so there it is, and I'll do another one here, another much thinner one here. There you go. There you go. Right, there we go. Sorry if the background's a little bit noisy, I'm right in the shop at the moment. So now I'm going to mix up a really nice deep red for the fly agaric top. Now unfortunately with this, you can use a masking fluid. So if you're a more seasoned painter and you want to have a masking fluid, you can, instead of leaving a void where the lines are, you can use a masking fluid on them. But I'm not going to be doing that today because I'm just doing a very simple design. Okay. So I'm just going to put my dry brush against here just to lift some of that moisture. So all I've done is rinsed my brush out and dried it on a piece of kitchen roll, and then I'm putting the dry brush against here just to lift some of that water away, and then I get a really nice faint look to that. So, and then I'm going to add a tiny little bit more Payne's grey into it just so I can put a little bit of colour on the side of the mushroom. So, hopefully you can see that. So this is just adding a little bit of dimension to my mushroom stalks. Now these kind of have little bits of soil and various other things on them, so they kind of get a little bit mucky, obviously, as they're pushing up through the ground, and that's fine. I'm just going to work with that. I'm just going to use a fairly crumbly, unmixed Payne's grey to add into that. And then I'm going to have a slightly more creamy colour for the underside of the mushroom. So this is going to be the underside of our mushroom. So this one at the top, you're not going to be able to see the underside, nor this one at the bottom, but because this one's at a slope, I'm going to do a little bit of the underside of the mushroom here. So later on I'm going to add some little lines to really enhance that, but for now I'm just going to leave the underside as it is. I hope you're able to see that okay. Right, now I'm going to use my red. So remember, if you're going to do it with the little spots on it, you'll have to just leave a void where the spots are. So on this one, I'm gonna have this here. I'm not going to be careful with it at all. Okay. So I've put all red there, and I'm going to do that same trick again of rinsing my brush, and then I'm going to touch it dry onto here, which is going to give me some lift of the paint, and that's going to be my speckles on here. When this dries, it will be a little bit more pronounced, but in doing it this way, I get to control exactly where I do them. I'm just going to give it another rinse and another dry. Okay. I'm just going to put my dry brush back into the red so that I can put a little bit more colour where I want it. And it won't leak into where you've just lifted the paint. Okay. For my next one, this is going to be one that's at a slant, so I'm actually going to darken this one off a little tiny bit. So I'm going to add a little bit more of a deep red and a tiny bit of black, because I want this one to be a tiny bit darker and deeper. There we go. So this I'm just going to leave some little, so we have a much more pronounced. So these brushes are really great, these Da Vinci ones, because with the real kind of sharp points, you can be as detailed as you want on them. So that looks much deeper on the camera than it is in reality. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that colour by rinsing my brush out and drying it off a tiny little bit. And I'm going to change the red tone slightly again from my final one. These lovely little flygarics just don't obey the rules of nature at all when they grow. They don't care how the fairy tales portray them, they just do their own thing. So I'm not being particularly careful with this. I don't need to be. It's my paint, I can do however I want. And if you do find that the wet on wet happens and some of your ink goes, that's fine, you can just pick it right back up. Just dry your brush and pick it right back up. Okay, let's move on to some leaves and things now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add some berries and some leaves down here to be the base of our wreath. So I'm going to mix up a multitude of different leafy colours. So I'm going to have browns right through to an olivey green and purples and all kinds. So if you're painting along, mix up a variety of autumn colours. This is where you get to be a little bit more creative and do your own thing. There is no right or wrong way to do this. So if you're lucky enough to have a lovely view out of your window, then you can look at that as well. Okay, so what I've done, I've got a variety of autumnal shades here in my palette. So I'm just gonna paint along with those. I'm gonna use the wet on wet technique because I'd really like to get some nice marbling on the leaves. So to start with, I'm gonna do maybe, what should I start with first? Maybe a nice oak leaf or something. Let's start with a nice oak leaf. Okay, so I have my example of how I'm going to do my oak leaf up here. So to begin with, can you see that okay? So here's my oak leaf shape, not being particularly careful with it. So I'm using quite a lot of water to fill it in. So I'm going to start with this primarily yellow colour. Okay. Just going to give that a quick rinse to remove some of the yellow out of the brush. And then I'm going to add some of my other colours in. So I want this wet on wet technique relies on the water pooling and mixing itself. You can help it along a little, but really you want it to do its own thing. These don't turn a colour by themselves, I mean with any help in nature, they do it all by themselves. So I'm just going to allow it to do it all by itself. If you want some of the edges to turn a little bit darker, you can come out and bring them out a little bit. I think I might make these edges come out a little bit. I'm going to add a much richer pigment down here. Okay, so I'm going to leave it to do its thing now I've done that. I'm not going to mess around with it. The temptation is to overmix it, and then you'll end up with one completely orange leaf. You won't have this gorgeous separation of yellow and red and orange right down through to crimson. You won't get that. So I'm going to leave that. If it starts mixing too much, you can go back in with a dry brush and lift colour out. That's fine. Anything that you do will just add to the kind of the mottled degradation of the leaf. It's fine to do that, but I really discourage you from messing around with them too much because we want it to take on that real kind of haphazard look about it. So I'm going to go in with a slightly more olivey green and do a different set of leaves this side. So I'm going to try and do a thin line for all my leaves to stem from. So I've got a variety of different olives here, so I'm just going to do a variety of different leaves and then add to the wet on wet technique as I go. So I've got quite a wet brush, but what I'm doing is, if I show you, I'm dipping it in the water, so it's very wet, you can see, but then I'm running it, twisting it as I go, running it along the side of here, so that I can get a really nice point on my mop brush here. You see I've got quite a good point. The reason I'm doing that is because you can make a really great leaf shape when you make contact with the paper when it's up on a point, and then lay it down and then bring it up to a point again. So I'll show you what I mean. So you start on a point and you lay it right down flat, and then you bring it up to a point again. Now it's wet, I can add whatever kind of mottling and colour I want onto that leaf. So you can make it any depth of colour you want after you've laid down the original wet shape. So I'm going to do the same thing again. So upright on a point, touch it to the paper and start bringing it down, and then lay my brush right down and then lift it up to a point as it meets the stem again. Then I'm just going to go back and just touch the point to the leaf a few times so that I can get a nice degradation of colour there. Okay, I'm going to put a slightly different colour on it now because I'd like this to change the colours as I go. You can see there the paint kind of seeped back onto the leaf. That's exactly what I want. So I'm going to make these leaves slightly smaller as I go. Okay. I'm going to do some leaves on the other side. So lay the brush right down and then lift it up and you get this gorgeous pool of colour just appears. You see? I'm going to allow it to do its own thing. That is half of the beauty of the watercolour technique, is that you'll then get this gorgeous colour, and as it dries you'll get all these beautiful kind of patterns and looks appear. Okay, so don't be tempted to go back in and fix anything. We don't want to fix it, we want it to be just as it is. So I'm going to go up here now, and I think I might do a, let's see, what should we do? Might do some little acorns or something. I fancy doing some little acorns. I'm going to stick with the leaves for the moment and then do the acorns afterwards over the top of the leaves, I think. So what shall I do now? I'm going to do a birch shaped leaf. So I'm going to have, so this is kind of a birch shaped leaf. So that's going to tuck in behind my oak leaf here. So I've touched my paint into the water with all the colour on it again, just to deepen that green at the base. Let's put a bit more, oh yeah, there you go. Let's put a few different shades of green into this one. Maybe a tiny little bit of red as well for it to change. Now I'm going to be careful not to mix this too much. I don't want to mix it too much. I want enough change on colour there for it to look like a really good autumnal leaf. Let's do another one of those while we're up here. So I'm going to have another one. So this one will be slightly behind this one, so if you imagine it coming round and out here. So there's its shape joining up. I'm just going to fill in the rest of this and then put another tone on here where it's changing colour. And put some more deep colour in here. And maybe just give my brush a quick rinse. Let's put a little bit more of that crimson in. Okay. Okay, I think we should maybe add a little bit of eucalyptus or something, just because I really love eucalyptus. I just think it's such a beautiful plant. It always looks so beautiful. So I'm making a kind of a real aquamarine greeny kind of colour in my palette, because it's got that gorgeous kind of aquary silvery kind of colour to it. So let me show you the colour that I've mixed. So it looks quite deep in the pot, but when you move it around, you can see it's kind of a very pale aquamarine type colour. So let's do a couple of eucalyptus leaves. So I'm going to tuck them in behind here. So here's where my eucalyptus leaves are going to go. So eucalyptus leaves, when they're young, are big circular discs. They're really beautiful. And then as the tree matures, they grow and they elongate. But for this one, we're going to use a juvenile leaf shape. So we're going to do it to look as though they overlap a tiny little bit. And then do a couple right on the stem, because that's how they grow, and put all over. Okay. So they look quite deep on the probably on the film, but in reality, they're going to dry really pale. You'll see in a moment. Okay. So I think maybe I should add... Just been a bit enthusiastic there, get rid of those splashes. I think maybe I'd really like to add a sycamore leaf. I'm running out of room, so let me think where I want to put that. Not sure how best to do that. I think what I'm going to do, let's have a look, how are we doing for time? Okay, we're getting short of time now, so in that case I'm just going to finish up what I want to do on the leaf. So what I wanted to do, because I'm going to make this not a fully connecting wreath, because symbolically it feels a little bit better when you have something that's not completely finished, when it's just kind of circling. So I think what I might do is that now. So I'm going to make a fairly thick colour up to do my twigs. Let's add a little bit of green into it maybe. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of make the branches entwine with each other. So my first one is going to come up. So I'm going to start out quite pale on this, and then we're going to build up more and more. So then I'm going to have another branch that comes out and kind of wraps around this one. Let's add a tiny bit more paint into this one. And the same with this. So I'm going to try and tuck these as best as I can. Hopefully all these should be nicely dry by now. So, oh no, let's bleed into that leaf. That's okay. So I want to tuck these in behind here so that they make kind of a tangle of branches behind. This would be something that you can definitely kind of add in later as well if you want to. So let's do another one that comes up. And kind of so these are fairly haphazard how I'm doing these. I just want them to look a little bit more twiggy, as it were. And then I'm going to do, just to bring in a little bit of an alternative colour, I'm going to get a nice deep blue and then do some nice berries. Let me just make up a nice deep blue quickly. Going to have a slight violety blue colour, just so that it doesn't sit in too much contrast to the autumn colours. So what I want you to do for this bit, if you're painting along, is just get a little bit of tissue paper or something, because what we're going to do is we're going to make some berries that have a little bit of a shine on them. Okay, so where are we going to put them? Let's put a little cluster down here maybe. Make a circle and leave a void on it so it's got a little bit of shine. I'm just going to leave a little bit of shine on these. I'm going to concentrate the colour quite heavily on the underside of them. So just leaving that tiny little bit on the top. And then if you lift your brush up right at the base, you can see that bloom of colour. Just kind of makes the bottom of the berry darker. So that's where I lift my brush, so I get that little bloom. And with a little bit of tissue paper, I've kind of rolled it into a little sort of cone. Just going to lift a tiny bit of that colour on the top of the berry, just to make them look a little bit more dimensional. So then you'll have a real deep bloom of colour at the base of the berry, and the top of the berry will be a little bit brighter. Just makes it look a little bit more 3D. So I'm going to dot a couple more of those around in various parts of our wreath. It's quite a good idea to do it in odd numbers. They seem to sit better in odd numbers and odd shapes. Whenever, I mean, that goes the same for flower arranging and so many other different types of things. Rule of 3 or rule of 5. Now a lot of people will be nodding when they hear that, know how it works. Okay, so there we go. We'll do these. These are looking really sweet now. I don't want to go over here because I know that some of these are still a tiny little bit wet. Let me see what happens. Let's have a look. See. Oh yeah, it's not running too badly. There we go. Rule of 3 or rule of 5. There we go. That works really well. That's okay, I like that. I'll do a couple here. So there we go. So that's looking quite sweet already. So what I'll do now, I'll allow you to play yourself with your design. Let me take this out. Oh, there we go. So I'll give you a slightly closer look of how the colour kind of pulls and changes by itself and how it kind of dries in a mottled way. Okay. So you can see that the eucalyptus is going much paler now. What I need to do is I need to make the twigs a little bit more dimensional. I need to go back over the fly agarics and add some grey shading to just add a bit dimension to their stalks. I need to go back in and put some details on the eucalyptus, so I can put that all together in a separate video link which I'll post later, and I can put together my positive comment on there.